Hey folks, this is KCG, and today I want to talk about another headphone. Last time I talked about the $4,000 Dan Clark Audio Expanse, but I figure, this is kind of unobtainium for a lot of people. So today I really just want to talk about the opposite end of the spectrum, and I really wanted to talk about one headphone in particular that I've owned since December 2021, which is quite an amount of time to have and demo a headphone, and I've used it pretty extensively at this point, and that is the Samson SR850. So the Samson SR850, this is a headphone that I believe is a clone, if I'm not mistaken, of the Superlux HD668B. I think Superlux, if they're the original manufacturer, they're basically making this with some minor modifications. But more interestingly, I believe this is also based on the design of the AKG K240, but they do sound different. Interestingly, I believe the Superlux that I just mentioned may sound very similar to this, with differences in measurements, maybe being, variant to variant, but they should be quite similar. So I really just want to talk about this. I picked this up for $25 at B&H, which is this blue version here is actually very specific to the B&H exclusive variant. So I picked that up there back in December 2021. Only 25 bucks, and it had free shipping. In fact, normally I think you will see this go for maybe 45 and under in general. So I would recommend picking it up, somewhere within that $30 price range as opposed to, 40 some dollars. Get the best bang for your buck. So let's start with build quality here. As you can kind of see, you should temper your expectations for a $25 headphone. Realistically, it's a very plastic build. This thing is very cheap feeling overall. It's definitely the kind of thing where if I were to throw it at a wall, I'm kind of wondering what things are going to pop off. If the cap's here, I could just probably pop that off even. But at the same time, if it gets the job done, then it gets the job done. So very plasticky build. Now for the ear pads, this is like I don't know if I will call it velour, but it's a velour ear pad. It is, there was a variant, I believe, that had like a, faux leather, I don't know what you want to call it, but supposedly not very comfortable, not very good. I actually think that, despite how cheap it is, and it does sort of feel cheap on your head, it's comfortable. You do have a 2-inch diameter here as well. And additionally, I should mention, these are the foam inserts it comes with. I actually pulled them out trying to make some sound modifications, and I cut up a mask and put that in there, just in case you're wondering. But there are foam inserts that come with this originally. So to keep the blue aesthetic for the B&H variant. So yeah, you've got these pretty comfortable pads. You get a decent amount of clearance, I suppose, for your ears. If your ears protrude a lot more, then maybe you'll have a problem with it, but it's not really a problem for me. I can wear these for several hours without much discomfort at all. Now, that being said, the headband here, this is one of those things I'm not entirely sure how this pans out for people with larger heads, but let's just take a quick look here. But there's basically this much displacement for the height adjust, and if you look close here, right up at the top, you've got this much room for height adjust. But as I kind of push up on both sides, you know, for somebody who's got a larger head, it actually doesn't even complete the full height adjustment. So there's a lot of room there to move, and it simply cannot because we've already maxed it out. So if you have a larger head, this really does not give a whole lot of additional ability for adjustment there. You know, it can expand wide and maybe you'll get a little bit more out of it, but I just don't know if it's great for larger heads. It fits on my head reasonably well. I can show you that now. This is right on my ears. If I were to like pull it even further, it, you know, now the ear pads are on my ears, but they're not like going over completely over my ears or anything. So really not the best for larger heads in general, I think. But otherwise, the, you know, because of its incredibly lightweight, I mean, even a PlayStation controller is probably could be heavier than this thing in some regard. But because of its super lightweight, I do find that in general, when I put it on my head, it's just very easy and comfortable. But there may be some, you know, clamping force wise, it's honestly not bad either. So, but it is certainly not the, you know, most luxurious feel, if that's what you're looking for. Now, let's kind of get into the sound aspect of this headphone, because we're talking about a $25, you know, to $40 headphone here. This is the kind of surprising thing about this headphone in particular, is that I've heard headphones like the Sivga Robin SV021, which is a $150 headphone. I would take this any day of the week in terms of sound over a headphone like that, because its tuning, while not perfect, does have some competence to it. And so let's start off with the bass. That is one of the more interesting aspects of this particular headphone, is its bass response. It does have a bass shelf. It has nice low end. It does have kind of a hump in the mid bass and the upper bass. It does start to dip a little bit into the lower mid range, but personally, I don't think I notice anything that makes me feel, you know, like it's intruding on any instruments or vocals, anything in that range, which is great. Even the HD 560S from Sennheiser has just just a little bit, and that's a pretty neutral headphone, and that still can dip into the mid range just a bit. So this has a little bit of a bass emphasis. So a lot of droning bass for synthesizers and things like that. This is honestly pretty awesome for that. I'm not sure if, you know, part of the bass response is following a target, but it does a really pleasant way of doing it without being overbearing to my ears as well. Something like the Sivga Robin, I think, was really overbearing in terms of its bass response, but this does it very pleasantly. So if you're listening to electronic music or hip hop or R&B, I think this is great for getting that dynamic punch and getting just a deeper rumbly feel as well because of that bass shelf. Now, in terms of the mid-range, I think, you know, we're still in a pretty competent territory there. It is kind of leaning towards neutral, but it does start to get brighter up in the upper mids, and that ends up being kind of the trend thereon with this particular headphone, is that it really does get bright. But in the mid-range, I still feel it has some strength there. Guitars definitely come across nicely. in my opinion, because that's really sitting in the mid-range and you get that a little bit of extra brightness there. But then when you start to get into the treble, that's where this headphone has the potential to get into some trouble. So this is really a treble energy headphone, and that's why I was trying to make some modifications personally by removing this particular foam insert, the stock foam insert, and make some adjustments. I don't know if I ever succeeded with it, if I'm being completely honest. But it gets really bright in the treble around, I think it's 5 to 10K. So because of that, there's a lot of potential for sibilance, especially to come across harsh. So female vocals, if you're hearing S sounds and consonant sounds, that may be something that just throws you off. So I recommend being cautious when it comes to listening to this headphone in like louder environments. If you're trying to listen to this headphone loudly, it's just gonna come across harsh in the treble region. So really, my recommendation there for listeners of this headphone is, dial it back, listen to more of a relaxed volume with it, and it can sound fantastic. And that extra treble energy can actually be to its benefit in some regard, as long as you're not pushing it to the point of, sibilance and just a very harsh energy. So in that regard, I do have some recommendations, right? Is that if you're considering looking at this headphone, you probably shouldn't be listening at loud volumes unless you're prepared to somehow do some modification to dampen that treble, but that's tough. You're probably going to end up impacting the entire frequency response when you make modifications. So bear that in mind. But if you have significant hearing loss in like 5 to 10K, maybe this is exactly what you're looking for, right? Maybe that detail has been lost and you want to bring that back. And this may be a great kind of entry level for a lot of people. Additionally, another aspect of the sound here is that this is a semi-open design, so it's not a closed back, it is semi-open, so you'll hear, there's some sound bleeding, and when you put it on, you can still hear around you, you can still hear the environment around you. There's a slight attenuation, so not too much noise isolation, but just a little bit. But when I listen to this headphone, I'm surprised at how wide the soundstage is. It's honestly one of the nicer aspects of this headphone. Being able to listen to instruments and have them nicely separated. This might be a great headphone for first-person shooters as well, with that extra energy in the treble. Some people might prefer, for gaming. But for music listening, I think if the music that you listen to is mixed and mastered in a more relaxed fashion, maybe this is fantastic for that, really. But if you're listening to energetic music with a lot of, synthesizers or guitars or, brighter snares or vocalists with more, sibilant sounding timbres, then this might not be the best choice, of course. But for the $25 I paid for this is a headphone, that you could buy and put it, in a classroom or a library or something like that. And, you wouldn't be too afraid of somebody beating things up. Although, yeah, you probably wouldn't want to put this in a library, given it doesn't really isolate particularly well. So that being said, I think this is a fantastic headphone. I really enjoyed it for metal music especially, but I've had to dial that back. I've enjoyed listening to, you know, R&B on this headphone as well, especially because there's a lot of elements of bass in R&B music, and this is a headphone that just does honestly a very enjoyable presence of its bass response, but you do have to dial back the treble to really enjoy it without, you know, overdoing it, overstepping the boundaries. So I think overall, if you're considering buying a cheap headphone, then this could be one way to enter into the audiophile space. But also do note it's a non-detachable cable, so people have made a lot of mods on this particular headphone. But you know, I've just been using it stock, and I've been very surprised in my time with it. So hope this helps some of you out there. If you didn't see my Dan Clark video about the Expanse, you can go and watch that video as well. And until next time, I'll see ya.